When I woke up after the fire, I saw my mother crying. I thought they were tears because I was alive, until her eyes accidentally landed on the insurance contract on the table. I woke up in the middle of the night, startled by the smell of smoke. The air in the room seemed to vanish. My chest tightened, and it hurt as if someone was squeezing my lungs. My throat was dry and sore. I sat up and coughed violently. In the dense darkness, my hands fumbled, bumping into the edge of the bed, the wall, but couldn't hold on to anything. My eyes were stinging. My head was spinning. The familiar room had suddenly become a cage filled with smoke. The smoke was thick and black, so acrid it burned my nose, eyes, and throat. I collapsed to the floor, trying to breathe in any remaining air near the ground, but there was nothing. There was only the cold of the tiles and the crackling sound of fire, as if it were laughing above my head. In a panic, I crawled towards the door, reaching for the doorknob. It was so hot. I screamed, my skin sticking to the red-hot metal. The smell of burning flesh filled the air. I yanked my hand back and a piece of skin tore off. I yelled, "Dad! Mom!" "Nathan." But there was no reply. There was only the hiss of the fire crawling up the walls and the frantic beating of my heart in my chest. I furiously pounded on the door. I rammed into it, screaming until my voice was hoarse, yelling as if my soul was being ripped to shreds. No one came. No one answered. I turned around and ran to the window, trying to pull and hit it, but it didn't budge. I saw clearly that it had been latched from the outside. A muffled cry escaped my lips. "Is anyone there?" But there was no one. I was trapped, abandoned. The room had become an inferno. Everything was hot and suffocating. I was disoriented, not knowing where I was in the house anymore. Everything was spinning. I felt like I was melting, my skin peeling off layer by layer. I screamed again, screaming as if my survival depended on someone hearing me. But all I could hear was the sound of burning wood and my chest pounding wildly in despair. I collapsed, my head hitting the floor. I forced my eyes open and saw fire. The fire was crawling towards the foot of the bed. Whips of smoke drifted across my face like black ghosts. Shaking, my throat tightened. Everything blurred, then went dark. And then, a siren wailed. Far away, then closer. I couldn't believe my ears, and I lifted my head. Although my vision was gone, I could hear it. Footsteps, the sound of metal clanging. Bam! The door was broken down, and a figure rushed in. I didn't know who they were. I only knew someone was pulling me out. Their hands gripped my shoulders, strong but rushed, lifting me up and pulling me through the sea of smoke, past the scorching heat on the back of my shirt. I was brought outside, my face pressed against the cold ground. Someone was yelling. Someone else was crying. Flashing lights constantly pulsed. I tried to turn my head to look back at the burning house. My dad wasn't there. My mom wasn't there. Nathan wasn't there. It was just me, alone. I woke up in a lifeless white sea, white walls, white lights, and the steady beep-beep of machines, like someone's heart was keeping me alive for me. The dense smell of disinfectant seeped into my throat. My skin was burned and raw, and every time I tried to move, it stung as if being pricked by needles. I was alive. My mind couldn't form any other thought but those 4 words. The door opened. My parents rushed in. My mother collapsed by the bed, tears streaming down onto my hand, while my father stood behind her, his hand trembling on her shoulder. "My child." "Thank God," my mother sobbed, her face pale, her eyes red. "We tried our best," my father said, his voice hoarse and tired, "but we couldn't get in. The fire blocked every way." I looked at them. 2 familiar faces, distorted by pain, shock, and tears. I wanted to ask something, but my throat was dry, and my mouth only let out a faint breath. I nodded, just slightly, because they were my parents, and I trusted them. I repeated that sentence to myself like a mantra to keep myself from doubting, even though something didn't feel right. I didn't hear them pounding on the door, didn't see anyone trying to unlock it, and there were no signs that they had been anywhere near me during that nightmare. But I was alive, and they were here. That should be enough, right? It took me nearly a month to recover. My skin healed, but the wounds inside did not. After more than a month in the hospital, I was discharged. My back still felt raw, and every time I moved too much, it felt like the newly healed skin was being torn apart. However, the thing that made it hardest to breathe was not the burns, but the blank spaces in my mind. We didn't go back to the old house, because there was nothing left to go back to. My parents took me to a new apartment, where everything was so clean it felt cold. Everything was arranged neatly, like a display room, without the smell of people living there, without any trace of life. I tried to tell myself this was a new beginning, but the more time passed, the more I felt like I was living in a prearranged space. Meals were always served on time, even when I hadn't yet said I was hungry. My pajamas were always washed, folded, and placed on the bed every night. I tried to change my routine, sleeping later, eating later, but everything still happened as it always had, as if I couldn't control my own life. At first, I thought it was because my parents were overly concerned, but gradually I wasn't so sure anymore. They cared, a lot, almost never taking their eyes off me. But whenever I mentioned the fire, they would ignore it. No follow-up questions, no answers, just a brief silence. Then they would immediately change the subject. It was as if it had never happened. At first I thought they didn't want to upset me, but it was the same every time, the same exact answer. No one looked me in the eye when they spoke. I started to dream. At first, they were just vague images, the firelight reflected on the walls, the crackling sound of wood. But gradually, I remembered more. In my dreams, I saw myself trying to open the door, the same wooden door. I twisted the doorknob until my hand bled. I yelled, punched, kicked, but the door wouldn't budge. Smoke poured in and I choked. In that moment, I heard something. Footsteps in the hallway. Not firefighters. The footsteps were too light, too close, then suddenly vanished. I woke up from the nightmare, drenched in sweat. My hand was still clenched as if trying to twist something. My chest aching as if I had been struggling all night. I sat in the darkness, breathing in ragged gasps. It wasn't just a dream. It was a memory that I had tried to forget, or that someone had made me forget. The new school year began, and I had to go back to school. As I was gathering papers for my re-enrollment, I remembered my mother had stuffed everything into a desk drawer somewhere. And I saw it, a carefully clipped, strangely thick and clean stack of documents at the very bottom. It was a life insurance contract with my name on it, signed 2 months before the fire. The beneficiary, my parents. I didn't understand. The first feeling was numbness, spreading from the back of my neck down my back, where the burns still hadn't completely healed. I stared at the contract as if it would disappear if I looked long enough. But it didn't. It just lay there, every black line of text printed clearly, neatly, properly. Memories began to come back, not in order, not coherently, but like broken pieces of glass stabbing into my head. I remembered how hot my doorknob was, how I woke up in the smoke and rushed towards it, but the door wouldn't move. I had used my whole body to ram into it. I had yelled. I had pounded until my hands were raw. It was useless. And then, I remembered asking them about it after I woke up, and they gently ignored it, as if I were a child hallucinating. Don't think about it, my child. It's all over. But I still thought about it. I found the phone number of the firefighter who had carried me out that day. I didn't know if I should call, but my finger dialed the number without me realizing it. His voice on the other end of the line was tired, but not without sincerity. Are you the person from the fire that day? The second-floor house? I said yes. There was a moment of silence. Then he said, the door to your room was nailed shut from the outside. A lot of nails. It took us almost 30 seconds to break it down. I don't know how I hung up the phone. I just remember standing there, in the stark white kitchen, trembling as if the house was on fire again beneath my feet. 30 seconds. If they hadn't arrived in time, I would have died. And they had nailed my door shut beforehand. I folded the contract and placed it on the table. My throat was dry. Everything in my mind shattered into 1,000 pieces. That night, the door was not open. The window was nailed shut. I had nearly died. I sat there until late, not sleeping, not blinking. The next morning, I called my parents over. I placed the stack of papers on the table, clipped together with the insurance contract. The room was silent, as if holding its breath, waiting to explode. My parents sat across from me. I looked them straight in the eyes. Why me? They were silent. This insurance contract, you signed it 2 months before the fire. The beneficiary is you. The firefighter said the door to my room was nailed shut from the outside. I tried to scream, to pound on the door, but no one answered. Still not a word. And don't say it was an accident. No one nails their child's door shut because of an accident. My mother trembled. My father buried his face in his hands. After a long time, he finally looked up, his voice hoarse. Because your brother is dying. I didn't say anything. My father continued. We don't have enough money. We need more than $3 billion to get a liver transplant. We couldn't borrow any more from anyone. There was nothing left to mortgage. You were the only one with a large enough insurance value. And you're healthy. No medical history. Easy to get approved. Easy to pay out. I felt my hands clench. So you chose to kill me. Simple as that. My mother burst into tears. We tried to make it quick, not painful. You were sleeping soundly. We knew exactly when you took your medication, your daily routine. We thought, if you died in your sleep, it would be... I slammed my hand on the table, cutting her off. Stop talking! The space shattered for a second. I stood up. My chest was heaving, my heart pounding so hard my head ached. Why didn't you try asking me? Why didn't you let me choose? I'm your flesh and blood. Why did you think killing me was more valuable than watching him die? My father looked at me, his eyes bloodshot. Because if we let you choose, you wouldn't have agreed, and we couldn't bear to lose another child. My mother slowly walked towards me, her hand reaching out. Then dropping. You're still alive. We never thought you'd escape. We were going to turn ourselves in after it was done. I turned away. I should have died so your plan would be complete, right? No one answered. I left that room not out of anger, but because I knew that if I stayed another minute, I would start to laugh. And there's nothing more terrifying than a betrayed child who can still laugh. That night, I didn't go back to my room, nor did I cry. I wandered the streets all night, like a puppet whose strings had just been cut, thrown off the stage after the play ended. The pain wasn't in the fact that they wanted to kill me, but in the fact that they had prepared so meticulously that they believed they wouldn't fail. My parents, the people who once held my hand to cross the street, who once packed me sticky rice for school every morning, had now become the people who meticulously planned to remove me from this world quickly, cleanly, without a trace. I thought I would hate them forever. But a few days later, my mother knocked on my door at midnight. She didn't say anything, just placed a small box on the table. Inside was my old middle school notebook. The cover still had a bit of chewing gum I had once stuck on it. I opened it and saw the scrawled handwriting. Mom is a superhero. Next to it was an old photo of my brother and me in the hospital yard, grinning widely, my hand holding a baguette dipped in soy sauce. I burst into tears. I had softened because I couldn't understand how something could be so cruel yet so desperate. I forgave them, not because they deserved it, but because I needed to breathe. The next morning, I packed my things and called a long-distance taxi. I didn't leave a letter, didn't say goodbye. I just left a photocopy of the insurance contract on the table. No threats, no warnings, just a way of saying, I remember. And I will always remember. I left, taking nothing but the shadow of a daughter who once believed that within her home, there was at least one place to return to. But it turned out that from the very beginning, that place had never existed. Several years later, I received an anonymous email. No subject, no sender, just a single line in English. He's gone. Funeral this Sunday. If you care. I didn't need to read it again. I knew who it was. At that time, I was living in Chicago, in my final year of college, working part-time at a small bookstore in Old Town. It had been 3 years since I left home, cutting off all contact with my parents. I didn't look back. I also didn't mention Nathan, my brother. He was the reason. He was the person named as the primary beneficiary on the insurance contract. He was the one my parents said would die without money for surgery. He was the one the whole family had traded me for, to keep him alive. I thought he had died long ago, but he hadn't. Now, he was truly dead. The funeral was in San Jose. I went alone, standing silently in front of the small funeral home at the end of a deserted street. Nathan's portrait was in the center. His eyes in the photo were still calm, as deep as a well. Looking into them, I only saw a bottomless darkness, and I wasn't sure if I was angry, grieving, or empty. My parents were in the front row, not looking like the people in my memory anymore. They were old, thin, and avoided my gaze as if I were a stranger. I didn't greet them. They didn't call out to me. I turned into the side hallway to get some air, and then I heard it. Two middle-aged women were chatting with strong American accents. One asked, "Did he die in a fire?" The other nodded, "Yes. The apartment in Sunnyvale. The fire started in the middle of the bedroom at midnight. Not the kitchen, not an electrical short. It was strange." I froze. It wasn't from an illness. It wasn't because he gave up on treatment. It was a fire. An accident. In the middle of the bedroom. I walked out of the funeral home, my hands shaking, my heart pounding like a drum. My throat was dry. The smell of incense still lingered in my nose. No one escaped this time. No firefighters. No one broke down the door. No one survived. Only ashes remained. And a familiar, chilling feeling. I couldn't leave San Jose right away. Something was wrong. It wasn't just the death, but this feeling, the feeling of having survived a fire and knowing it wasn't an accident. That night, I rented a small room near the airport. Not eating, not sleeping. I sat at my computer until morning, my hands trembling nonstop. I started with the name of the old insurance company, the name printed on the paper I had accidentally found at the bottom of the drawer. They still existed, and they were also the company that paid out for Nathan's fire. It wasn't easy to find a copy of the contract, but I knew I had to. I asked an old friend named Emma, who now worked in insurance law in New York and owed me a favor from college. 2 days later, Emma sent me a PDF file. I opened it, my hands sweating. The life insurance contract was in the name of Nathan T.L. The date it was signed, 8 months before he died. The amount, exactly the same as my old contract. The primary beneficiary, my father. I stared at the words as if they would erase themselves if I blinked long enough. 8 months. They had 8 months to prepare everything. Enough time to play the role of a grieving family. Enough time to find a cheap apartment in a suburban area, and enough time to stage another accident. I put the laptop down and sat in the dark. I didn't cry. I only thought of one thing. Was I the first child they had chosen? Or just the first one? To survive? I went back to the old house without warning. Their house was still as tidy as ever, the only difference being that there wasn't a single photo of Nathan in the living room. I placed the file on the table without greeting them, without beating around the bush. Nathan died in a fire. In the insurance contract, the beneficiaries are still the two of you. Just like mine was back then. They looked at me, not in panic, not in surprise. There was just a moment of stillness, as if they had been waiting for this day for a long time. My mother lifted her cup of tea, blew on it gently, then put it down. "Don't you still understand? We did everything to save the whole family." "The family? Or to save your reputation from crushing debt?" My father raised his eyebrow. "Do you think it's easy to live in this country? What did we raise you two with? How much did we struggle for this house? Who is it thanks to that you got an education and lived a decent life?" I let out a laugh, a dry, choked laugh. Decent? By locking your own daughter in a burning room? And then a few years later, burning your son to get insurance money? My mother snapped. "We didn't want to do that to you. You were stubborn, you woke up. Back then, if you had just stayed in the hospital longer, if you hadn't dug everything up, we wouldn't have needed to resort to Nathan." I froze. I don't know what just shattered in my heart, but I heard the sound of it clearly. "You mean, if I had died completely that day, Nathan wouldn't have had to die? You're the one who messed everything up. You should have been more sensible." My father, who had been silent until now, finally spoke up. "We let you live. We gave you a chance. But you turned your back on your family. That was your choice. Don't blame us." Not a single tear. Not a single word of apology. Only a ruthless brazenness. I stood up, my hands trembling, not from fear, but from rage. "You're monsters." I walked out of that house without looking back. I was in pain, not just because of the truth, but because I had once been silent, once forgiven, Once tried to convince myself that they were still my parents, but that forgiveness had killed Nathan. I opened the old file again, arranging each copy of the contract, the financial statements, the audio recording of our conversation. Everything I had was like a nail. I was driving each one into the coffin they had dug for themselves. I submitted everything to the police quietly, following the proper procedures. I thought I would feel relieved, but that feeling never came. Instead, there was an emptiness, just like the time I stood in the burning house, suffocating in smoke and no longer recognizing the way out. Just a few days later, I received a call. "Get out of here. Now. If you open your mouth again, don't blame us for being cruel." I recognized my father's voice. Although he tried to force out every word, trying to make it sound like a warning out of concern for me, I wasn't 13 anymore. I didn't tremble. "Weren't you already cruel?" I hung up. And I understood. This wasn't just about taking them to court. It was about reclaiming the last piece of humanity in me that they had tried to burn away. I had survived once. And this time, I would win. My parents were arrested. They were brought to court with all the evidence. I had collected the copies of the insurance contracts, the recorded confrontation, and the testimonies of neighbors who had been suspicious of the unusual behavior in our family. But when they stood before the judge, they didn't bow their heads. There were no tears. Not a single word of apology. My mother said, "You're an unfilial child. You stabbed your own parents in the back." My father was colder. "You should be grateful you're still alive." They didn't feel any remorse. They saw me as a traitor, not a victim. The last look they gave me, as they were led away, held nothing but hatred. And perhaps that was when I truly lost them. For a long time after that, I didn't cry, didn't get angry. I just felt empty. What I had once called family now felt like a nightmare I woke up from in the middle of, not knowing if I had truly escaped. There were nights when I lay in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling still a cold white. I asked myself, if the door had opened that day, if I had escaped sooner, would things have been different? Or would they have found another way? I don't have the answer. But I have one truth. They chose to kill me. And then, they chose to kill my brother. And I chose to live. One late afternoon at the city cemetery, I stood before my brother's gravestone, Lucas. The wind blew softly, and the leaves rustled. I placed a white carnation on the ground, my hand trembling slightly. "I'm sorry, Lucas," I whispered. "I should have seen it sooner." I remembered his eyes the last time I saw him. He was still my brother, though thin and tired. The only one who didn't try to deceive me. The one who had quietly protected me while I naively believed in family. He didn't deserve to die. Not like that. I had lost everything. The family dinners, the laughter, the childhood memories now all tasted of smoke. But I was alive. And in that life, I chose to hold on to the truth, not for hatred, but to remember how I walked out of that loop. Now, I live in a small city, working at the local library. Every morning, I arrange books, water the plants, and sometimes tell stories to the children who come to read. I live a quiet life, but for the first time, it's a quietness I chose, not one that was forced upon me. I no longer have a family, but I have a new life. A heart, though once suffocated by betrayal, still has room for forgiveness. Not for them, but for myself.